Before we even begin to talk about animation, I think it's important to spend a little bit of time looking at the timeline. So when you place something on the stage, you'll notice that the timeline automatically gets something called a keyframe. A keyframe represents a major change within the animation. Now, we'll talk about the frames in much greater detail a little bit later on. My main focus is you understanding exactly what the timeline allows you to do. So the timeline is constructed of frames, as animations are constructed of frames. But the timeline, by default, is really nothing more than a frame holder. It just holds frames. So if we take a look at these numbers, this isn't necessarily frame 20 over here, because we don't have a frame here, but this is where a frame 20 would go. And you'll notice that every 5 frames, the shading within the timeline is slightly different. The only reason why it's like that is to make it easier for you to count frames. That's it. It has no other significance beyond that. So here we have all these frame slots, waiting for content, waiting for frames, waiting for animation. Once you have animation, for example, what I will do is select this slot where the frame 20 would go, and then I'm going to come up the insert menu, and from there I can select timeline, and then I will choose frame. By inserting a frame, you'll notice that the frames between 1 and 20 become populated, meaning that you can click and drag this playhead. Now, believe it or not, you have an animation here. It's not all that exciting, but it is an animation. And so what we're looking at here on frame 1 is a keyframe, which is a major change, which is this object showing up. Then we'll simply have frames. And these frames are doing nothing more than making this object last in time, longer. Now, you'll notice a little box at the end of this animation strip. This little box is nothing more than telling you it's the last frame. It really has no other significance beyond that. So there are some views associated with the timeline. We'll talk about how you can work with frames in much greater detail a little bit later on. Again, what I want to do here is to get you comfortable with the timeline. So here's the playhead. That's something that you're going to do using all the time. When you drag it back and forth, that's called scrubbing. You'll notice as you drag the frame numbers down here towards the bottom change. Watch, if I drag, they increase. If I drag to the left, they decrease. So you get a frame read out. But you also get a second readout right down here. The default frame rate inside a Flash is 24 frames per second. Means 24 of each of these frames will play every single second. To give you some frame of reference, film plays at 24 frames per second, and digital video plays pretty close to 30 frames per second. If not 30 frames per second in most situations. So the higher your frame rate, typically the more realistic your animation can look. You also have some controls down here towards the bottom. I guess I would call it them VCR controls. VCRs haven't been around for a while now, but you know what I mean. You can step through frame by frame. You can play, stop, pause. Move to the end of the animation, go to the beginning of the animation. They allow you to control the playhead. There's also some options over here that we'll talk about as we begin to animate. As talking about now really won't make a heck of a lot of sense without an actual animation in place. But if we come over to the top right-hand corner, in the top right-hand corner, you have some options for the view of the timeline. Right now, we have it in the normal view, which is the default. But if you want to, you could set it to a smaller view like tiny, which gets really hard to select frames and find frames. But if you have a lot of animation, or should I say an animation gets pretty far out within the timeline, this view might be helpful. And then of course we have the opposite, which is preview, which is much bigger. There's also something called preview in context, which is preview in context of the stage. So this is what this guy looks like on the stage. So you get a little thumbnail of essentially the stage within this frame view. So somewhere in here, you should find a view that works well for you. Throughout this course, I'll be using the normal view. Finally, if you need to collapse the timeline, you can do that by double clicking this tab. And once it collapses, you can re-expand it by double clicking it again. So what we really need to talk about in the next movie is exactly what a keyframe is, a blank keyframe, and a frame. And with that knowledge, we'll have the ability to start creating animations.